Hello and welcome to Literary Notes, a podcast by the Washington Talking Book and Braille Library. I'm your producer, Nathan Ureta. Seeing as it's Christmas Day today, I thought it might be nice to find something in the archives with a festive bent. I couldn't find anything explicitly pertaining to the holidays, but I did find this interview of author Jonathan Tropper, writer of the novel This Is Where I Leave You. After a messy end to his marriage and career, Judd Foxman returns to his childhood home to mourn the death of his father. There, he, his mother, and his 3 siblings sit Shiva, a Jewish mourning tradition where immediate family of the deceased spend 7 days together. While having nothing to do with the holiday season, I thought a book about being forced to spend time with your family would be tangentially appropriate. He sat down with volunteer Heidi Lang in 2009 to discuss the novel. Here's their conversation.
Jonathan Tropper is in our studio today to talk to us. He's the author of 4 other novels and is a professor of English at Manhattanville College in New York. So thank you so much for being here.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I just thought we'd start off with maybe explaining to some of our listeners that it takes place over the 7 days as a family is sitting Shiva. Am I saying that correctly? So can you explain for our listeners what exactly that means?
Yeah, the Shiva is a Jewish ritual of mourning. When a member of your immediate family dies, the family comes together under one roof, usually the home of the deceased, if that's possible. And they all spend 7 days sitting on very low chairs, which is a sign of mourning, and kind of reflecting on the life of the deceased, while meanwhile friends, neighbors, and relatives all come and visit them and offer comfort. And it's kind of like a 7-day wake, except there's no booze. So,
But I thought it was interesting you just mentioned sitting on the low chairs, because that came up a lot in the book. And that was one fact I didn't know about the tradition.
Yeah, originally, I think I did some research into it. Originally, they sat on the floor. You had to eschew anything that was a sign of luxury. So they would sit on the floor. They wouldn't wear shoes or anything leather. They wouldn't shave or shower or bathe, and they just had to sit there for 7 days. And you know, the tradition has been updated. The chairs they sit on now are these low chairs, but they're upholstered, cushioned chairs. They're just very low to the ground. Whereas all the people who visit them sit in regular chairs. So it's sort of a strange position because the mourners end up sitting down while the visitors are sort of sitting over them, looking down at them. But it's meant as a way for the community to come out and comfort the mourners.
So the main character, Judd Foxman, before this happens, he's not exactly an observant Jew, but
the family was not raised with any religion at all. They're shocked that their father has left. Their father, who was a proud atheist, who didn't raise them religious at all, has left this bizarre last request that they come together and sit Shiva for him.
But there were moments where it seemed like the tradition did bring Judd some comfort. And I'm just curious about your own background and your...
Well, I've never sat Shiva before. I've never lost a member of my immediate family. So I've visited many people who have sat Shiva. So I've been in Shiva houses and I've watched the tradition and I've been part of it as a visitor, but I've never done it myself. So,
what about other rituals of Judaism? Has that been an important part of your life?
Yeah, I mean, this is the first book. This is my 5th novel. It's the first one I wrote that includes any kind of Jewish knowledge at all. I was raised in a very liberal, enlightened Jewish home, so I was aware of all the traditions, and they played a part in our lives. But we were raised really, to be part of the world at large. So, I think my parents sort of struck this balance of a very enlightened cultural approach to the religion.
Can you imagine it being a source of comfort, though?
I think. But the truth is, when you watch the Shiva process, when you go visit a Shiva home, you see that it works. What it does is it's a buffer. When you lose somebody, facing your everyday life again, with your grief can be very difficult. And so it gives you a buffer of a week before you go back to your life to just kind of make some peace with what's happened, the comfort of your family around you, which in the case of my book isn't necessarily comfort. Friends, old and new, long lost acquaintances all come to see you, and there's something about it that's both comforting and in a sense positively distracting that keeps you from dwelling on your sorrow for too much because somebody else walks through the door, someone else to say hello to, someone else to talk to. And ultimately, I think it gives you that buffer. I think the real mourning then takes place when it's over and you go back alone to your life, but you've had these 7 days to kind of build up for it.
Your novel, I felt like, could be read on a lot of different levels. I mean, obviously, there's the kind of surface story about the family and what happens over the 7 days, but underneath that, there's religion, there's mortality, there's redemption. And just curious, when you started writing it, what were you thinking you were going to write about?
I was thinking I was going to actually write about a marriage. The novel opens up, and the novel is told from the point of view of Judd Foxman, who's a 35-year-old man who's just lost his wife and his career in one day. He walks in early in the novel, he walks in on his wife in bed with his boss, effectively losing his job and his wife. And his father passes away 3 months later, and so when the novel opens up, Judd is in this downward spiral from having lost his wife and his job. I wasn't going to write about the Shiva at all. What it was really going to be about was Judd kind of lashing out and eventually coming to terms with the fact that he has to kind of start from scratch and build his life again. It was going to be a novel about divorce, looking back on the marriage, and all of that. And what happened was I had written about 70 or 80 pages, and then I decided it would be a great idea to bring Judd home to his nuclear family for an event, because, you know, when your life is falling apart, it's sort of a terrible time to visit your siblings and your parents, especially if you don't get along that well. And so I wrote this chapter where he goes back there, and I found that, I created these siblings for him and this wacky mother, and I found that I was so enjoying writing them that it was the first time the book really came alive for me. So what I decided was to scratch all the stuff I'd written in between and just make it a book about Judd and his family. So it's still a book about Judd, the demise of Judd's marriage, but it's also a book about his siblings and his family, and I just found that to be much more entertaining and interesting.
I loved how the descriptions of the people, there are moments where they drove you crazy, and then you got a sign of this other side of them that was so lovable, and how, we love people despite or even because of their imperfections. And I'm wondering if you were conscious during it, like, well, we've got to make this character more likable, or...
Yeah, I don't really shoot for likable or not likable. My policy about characters over time has kind of crystallized for me that nobody is any one thing, and nobody is consistent. So I don't like creating any character whose behavior can be, charted on a graph. What I do try to do is give every character a moment where they're not perhaps their finest moments, and then moments where you see redeeming qualities in them. And the idea is basically just that at any given time, anyone could be your best friend or your worst enemy, and I just try to make everybody rounded like that.
I was really fascinated by the character of Hori. Can you talk a little bit about him and what he meant to you?
Yeah, Hori is a character. He was Judd's next door neighbor. He was a very close friend of the family, and he was a good athlete. He was Judd's sister's Wendy's boyfriend for a while. And at some point after they had all left for college, he was in a bar fight and he got his head smashed in by somebody, and he had a small brain injury, and now he is prone to seizures and memory lapses, and he just was never able to kind of recover from that accident to the point where he could go on and leave town. So he has stayed, and he had worked for Judd's father, and he's there mentally, but he has certain disabilities, might be a strong word, but he's prone to seizures. He can't really live alone because of that. He's prone to memory loss, things like that. I really wanted a counterbalance to what Judd was going through. Everything that Judd was going through were things to some extent of his own design, even though he doesn't realize that. And they were things you can overcome. And I wanted somebody in the story who Judd actually cares about a lot, who what's happened to him is so categorically worse than anything Judd's going through, and yet he breezes through the novel, sort of comical, a little bit tragic, but very accepting of his fate. And I just wanted that as a counterbalance. I tried not to do it too overtly, but just as a counterbalance to Judd feeling so sorry for himself when Judd is still perfectly healthy and young and able to rebuild. And Hori, this is the best it's going to get for Hori. So That's why he was there.
The characters in the family seemed very disconnected, yet also so yearning for connection. And sometimes I think that in our modern civilization, that's just, rampant. It's kind of the nature of things.
Well, people like to say it's a dysfunctional family, because they fight and they argue and they behave loudly in bizarre ways towards each other. They get into fights. The brothers get into fist fights. They say, horrific things to each other, even though they make you laugh. They're pretty horrific things. But I don't think this is a dysfunctional family. I think the fact that they all came back and submitted to their father's request to sit Shiva shows that beneath all of the fighting and the dysfunction, this is a family that still feels they belong together. So even though they don't like each other very much and haven't seen each other in some cases in over a year and tend to stay away from each other, when it comes to an event like this, even though they're not happy about it and even though they gripe about it and act out and do some horribly funny and stupid things, they still come. And nobody ever says, I'm not going to come, and to me that's actually a modern functional family, Functional doesn't mean everyone has to get along,
Yeah. And so that ability to communicate that they seem to really struggle with. Do you have kids? Actually?
I have 3 kids.
3 kids?
Yeah.
How do you kind of work in your family to keep the connections, to keep the communication?
Right. Well, it's something I think every family struggles with. This is a family in my novel that were raised by 2 very different parents. They have a mother with no boundaries who talk to them about everything, including a lot of things that, teenage boys don't want to talk about with their mother. They have this crazy sort of oversexed psychologist mother, and then they have this very stoic father who would never say I love you, who would never, show any real affection, and who loved his kids but had no means of expression. So these kids, grew up into adults with no idea of what appropriate communication is. And that makes them, even though they function out in the world fine with each other, they have no idea how to talk to each other because there was just never anyone safe to model after. In my own family, I try to be more expressive than maybe my inclination might be, and I sort of force myself, also having been raised by, a father from a different generation for whom certain emotional expressions just aren't in his repertoire. If I ever feel myself in any way sliding in that direction, I kind of overcompensate in the other direction, just so in the hope that, my kids will never feel that I was emotionally distant. But, truth is, I think we're all destined to screw up our kids anyway, but, we try our best.
Mm-hmm. And are you close to your siblings? Do you have siblings?
I do have siblings. Yeah, I'm fairly close to them. I think that there's probably some, there is some distance here and there, but, we're fairly close.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sure, what were their reactions to you?
I mean, they've read all my books, and they play this game with all my books. This one unintentionally does bear a little more resemblance superficially, just in terms of the number of siblings, 3 boys and a girl, which is what I come from, things like that. But I always tell my siblings and anyone else who thinks they see something familiar in the book that, the people I know in real life are way too dull to be put into a novel. And, you're flattering yourself if you think you're as interesting as the people I can make up. So,
There's some really important acts of forgiveness in the book. And did you start off knowing how, some of those relationships would end, or?
I never start off knowing everything. All I know is who my main character is and what I want his overall journey to be. And one of the themes that runs throughout a handful of my books is the idea that, we think of forgiveness as something you give to someone else, but the truth is, forgetting the other person, forgiveness is very important for the person who gives it. And so the themes running through certain of my books, like the Book of Joe, which is probably my most popular book, and this book, are just that at some point you have to forgive, not because the other person deserves it, but because you need to just move on. And that's something that I think happens a lot in this book as well, is Judd figuring out that the anger isn't really working for him anymore. So,
in what ways would you say this novel is different than your other ones?
It's a little darker. I've been told it's a lot more sexual than some of my other ones, which, was not intentional, except that Judd's a guy who just found out his wife's been sleeping with somebody else for over a year. So he's obviously dealing with some issues about his manhood, and he's acting out in ways where he's trying to rediscover his own manhood. So in that sense, he is kind of singularly focused on sex. So it's a little darker. It's probably a little sexier. And what I did with this book, which I've never done before, is it's more of an ensemble piece. Like I followed all, I've got his 3 siblings and the mother, and I've given them all their own stories as well. So it feels like sort of a bigger, richer novel, I think, because we're following all these other characters as well.
Mm-hmm. And I've heard that it has been picked up to become a movie. Is that correct?
Yes, it was optioned by Warner Brothers, and I was hired to write the screenplay. So I actually just submitted this week my first draft of the screenplay.
Congratulations.
So I'm hoping,
What's that like, writing a screenplay compared to a novel?
It's different muscles. I really enjoyed. This is not the first screenplay I've written, and novel writing is really about the craft and about each sentence and about description and about tone and mood and screenplays are 95% dialogue, and you have to be able to show all the things that you could describe or write in a novel. You have to show that simply through action and dialogue. So it's very challenging, especially when you're used to writing novels, to say, okay, now I have to show that he's feeling this, but I don't have the luxury of writing 2 paragraphs about how he feels. It has to come out in a gesture, a move, a nuance, and a screenplay is only 100 pages. A novel is 350, 400 pages. So you have to accomplish the same thing visually in many less pages. But the other advantage is you can write them much faster. So
you have done this before? Do you have?
I have. I've written a screenplay for Fox called Harvey, which is actually hopefully going to get made in the next few months. It seems to be headed that way. And I wrote a screenplay of one of my earlier books, which we're still trying to get set up somewhere.
Great.
So, yeah.
How is it dealing with Hollywood?
Well, you have to have good agents who do most of the dealing for you. But I've had a very positive experience. 4 of my books have been optioned. None of them have been actually greenlit yet, but I've watched the process, and I stayed uninvolved for the first 3, and now I've begun to get involved as a screenwriter. But it's I can always come back and write a book and do that, and nothing I do there can affect what I do here. So I feel kind of safe that even if the whole thing goes to hell, I'm still going to sit here and write my books.
Yeah, you'll be good.
Yeah,
I can imagine there's got to be kind of ownership issues. I know it'd be hard for me if it was like my baby and it's not just you anymore in control of it.
But that's true. But relative to publishing, you're very well compensated for that inconvenience. And so at some point, it's about paying your mortgage and being able to survive as a writer. And if selling the rights to Hollywood enables me to continue to write novels full time, then that's something I'm willing to do. I also am a movie fan, and I live in the hope that somebody will make a good movie out of these books. But in the meantime, it's a way to make a living, and it's also it's just that hope that someone will make a quality film out of one of your books, and that will sell way more books. So
Yeah, and what a great experience to have.
Yeah,
that's great.
So.
Do you have any little fantasies about who you would picture if you could pick any actor?
I don't, and that's always a hard question for me because people assume I do, but when I write them, I picture them so strongly in my head, and they're not based on movie stars. Mm-hmm. So pretty much any movie star that got put in that role wouldn't feel right to me, and and at some point I'm sure I'd accept it, but I don't have any vision of actresses. Or actors playing these parts.
Oh, God, that's going to be interesting. I can't wait for
Yeah.
that to come out. I mean, the dialogue, I think, is going to be really, really fun.
I hope so, yeah.
Did you always want to be a writer?
Yeah. I wanted to be a rock star, but didn't work out. This was my fallback position. It was the only English and writing were really the only subjects I was particularly good at. I wasn't good at memorizing for history. I was good at science, but I knew I didn't want to go into that. And I was horrible at math, which also eliminated a lot of the sciences for me. So I always enjoyed writing. I never really thought I would do it professionally, but at some point I just got inspired to try, and I tried and failed. And then a few years later I tried again because I think deep down I knew there was nothing else I really had a shot at being good at. I could do other things. I was working in business and I could make a living, but I wanted to do something that I loved doing, and this was my only shot, so I kept at it.
So how much teaching do you do these days?
Not very much. I've never done a lot of teaching. I'm not a professional teacher. I teach one undergrad writing workshop, and that's what and that basically happened because I needed a place to write. So I contacted all the colleges within like 20 miles of my house, and I said, who wants me to teach a class? And this small college in Purchase, New York called Manhattanville College responded and said, we'd love you to teach a class. And So now I go there and I write every day, and once a week I teach a class. This year I've taken off because between the book tour and some of the scripts I'm writing, I just don't have time. But in general, I teach once a week at Manhattanville College.
I don't know if you saw a couple of months ago in the New Yorker, there was an article about teaching of creative writing.
I did.
And it was the argument or the controversy over, can you teach creative writing? Right. And some people think, oh, absolutely. And others say,
no. So my feeling is you can't. You can't teach someone to write if they don't have the instincts to write. But there are a lot of people who might have the instincts but need the feedback and need to learn how to critique their own writing and need sort of to hone that skill and to sharpen it and to know what works and what doesn't and to learn how to just critically assess their own writing and edit it and improve it. And that can be taught. But you can't give somebody... you can't just take somebody in and say, I'm going to teach you how to write novels. That I don't believe you could do. Or short stories or any kind of fiction. Or, that's an instinct that comes from the person.
Do you always write novels or have you done some other...
I'm pretty... I write novels and screenplays, but I'm not a nonfiction writer. I just don't have the head for the research. And I've written occasionally essays here or there. I've written, for the back page of the New York Times Magazine once, and I've written for an anthology, sort of a nonfiction memoirish piece, but for the most part, I stick to fiction.
And do you read fiction as well?
I do.
Yeah?
Yes.
Who do you like? Who's...
Some of my favorite authors are Richard Russo, Michael Chabon, Jonathan Lethem. I read a lot of debut fiction. I get sent a lot of debut fiction by other publishers who are hoping, for a blurb, and so I've gotten into the habit of just reading. I like to read new voices and new fiction. I like John Irving, Joyce Carol Oates, although she has written so much, so.
So do you make it a habit to write every day?
Yeah, I treat it like my job. It is my job, so if I spend too much time not writing, I start to feel like I'm not earning my keep, and my kids will be out on the streets. So, I do try to work every day.
Did I also read that you're working on a television series? That's the Fox
No. Fox. At Fox, I wrote a movie.
Okay.
No, I have pitched 2 television series in the past, neither of which I sold. And I'm now working with another writer that I admire a lot, David Schickler, and he and I are developing a show together that we're going to hopefully take out in the next year and try to sell. But we're still in the beginning stages of that. So
would you ever consider relocating, or are you a New Yorker?
No, it's not that I'm a New Yorker, but I wouldn't relocate to California. Certainly not Los Angeles. It's just there's no reason to leave New York just to live in Los Angeles. If I was going to leave New York, it would be to live somewhere much more countrified and rural, and not just go to another city. So,
any other novels that you're working on, or are you focused now on the...
Well, I'm supposed to have started a new novel. I haven't yet. I don't work at the pace that some other writers do. Although, 5 novels in 10 years is not bad.
That's pretty good.
But I can't do a novel a year. So I do owe one theoretically on my contract a year from this September, which I hope to have done, even though I haven't started it yet. And I'm still kind of putting it together. I have this character in my head I want to write about he's very different from anyone I've ever written about. I haven't worked out his story just yet. I've got his situation, and I know what he's like, and I'm ready to start kind of writing him, but I need to have a slightly better idea of what his story is. So I think, when this whole book tour dies down, I'll probably sit down and start writing that.
Yeah, let it percolate a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know you probably have lots of them, but This Is Where I Leave You, what would you say some of your favorite scenes are that you look forward to seeing in a movie?
Well, everybody talks about the scene where Judd walks in on his wife and his boss in bed, because I did some stuff with that scene that make it, really heartbreaking and incredibly funny at the same time, because that was a hard thing to picture. Like, what do you do in that situation when you walk in and your boss is in bed with your wife and the 3 of you are now in this bedroom and all the secrets are out? What's that conversation like? How does it work? Does it go right to violence? What happens?
I loved how you had that statement about having 20 things in your head that you want to do, like right at that exact moment.
Yeah. So I tried to really freeze that moment and spend some time in it, and then complicate it by the fact that Judd is holding a large cheesecake for his wife's birthday with lit candles. And, that's a scene I think, that I really enjoy. I very much grew to like, Judd has a younger brother in the book, Philip, who's kind of the family rascal and ne'er-do-well, and I really enjoy pretty much every scene he's in, every chapter he's in. He's just always causing trouble.
Oh, he made me laugh a lot.
Yeah, and so I would, I think if we get to the movie, I'm really looking forward. I just wrote the script, and I gave Philip even more to do in the movie than he does in the book. You can't follow all these characters in a movie, so some have been punched up a little bit, some have been reduced a bit, but Philip sort of took over the movie a little bit, and he's just a fun guy to watch. And I enjoy the romantic scenes with Judd and Penny, who's this girl he reconnects with when he's back in his hometown, sitting Shiva, and there's something sort of sad and romantic about those scenes as well. So yeah.
What did you see her? I was struck by that too. How it was sad, yet somehow it felt hopeful as well.
Right,
and her role.
Yeah, I mean, what happens is he's still grieving the loss of his wife. He still hasn't really accepted the fact that his marriage is over. And then, he starts spending time with this girl he knew in high school, whom he never really had a solid relationship even back then with. But the idea is not so much that Judd will now run off into the sunset with Penny, because they've both maybe come too far for that. It's sort of sad that, they've both gotten older now and both of them have gone down different roads. But it's the idea that based on his interactions with her, it's the idea and the hope that he can find love again. Not necessarily Penny and not necessarily him for her, but that both of them are still in a position where they can go out into the world and find another partner. And so those scenes are sort of, they were a little hard to write because there's something very bittersweet about them. It's in another book, that could have been the beginning of a great love story, but in this book, it's really just two people who have kind of gotten a little damaged reaching out to each other for a little while.
I actually liked that it didn't become this romantic love story because it felt so more true to life that that is.
I mean, Judd's in Judd will take any girl who wants him right now. He's so desperate and lonely, and he recognizes that. And his biggest accomplishment in this book is recognizing that and not going in for another relationship. And the idea is just that it is out there at some point, but first you have to sort of make peace with what's happened to you and be sure you're not just doing it so you won't be alone. He's never been alone. So, my goal for him by the end of this book was to just be okay with the fact that he's going to be alone.
So. It really seemed like life in this book is it's very messy. That doesn't mean it can't be beautiful.
Right.
Yeah.
And you could just take those moments. It doesn't have to be a happy ending. Like every day, with people with people you meet, you can have great moments, even if the overall picture isn't to your perfect specifications, and you just keep, working on making your life as good as it could be. That doesn't have to you don't have to ever reach the finish line there. So
is that something you want readers to kind of walk away with after reading this?
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't really like to say that my books impart lessons. They're
the moral of the story.
Yeah, it's really just to spend some time with these people and have fun and have fun reading about them, and then kind of if it makes you reflect a little bit on your own life and you see some truth in it, then that's very gratifying. But I'm not out there, I don't set out to write any book to teach a lesson. So,
if you had more pages to write in this story, how do you think it would have continued? Or do you feel like this is where it needs to be?
I don't really go beyond. I mean, one thing you've learned about the Foxman family is every single one of them is capable of totally screwing all this up at any given moment. So I assume if I had another 100 pages to write, there'd be another 100 pages of fights and sex and screw-ups and makeups and mistakes and, brooding, and, it would just go on because that's who this family is.
Yeah, one of my favorite quotes about families, which really rung true for me, is that we love each other but can't stand being around each other very long, but the love truly is there.
Yeah, and he says at the end of the book, when the Shiva is over, Judd already senses, like he says, we've just spent 7 days together and already he can feel them all separating again. He could just feel them needing to get away from each other and not meeting each other's eyes and knowing that nothing has changed really. They didn't go through this whole week and now they feel much closer to each other. They're just going to go right back to being who they are for the most part. Maybe they've exorcised some demons, but there's just some stuff that's hardwired there that's always going to be like that.
Yeah, I found that very hopeful. So thank you so much for coming in.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful book. I'm very excited to see the movie at some point.
I hope so, yeah.
I'm Heidi Lang, and I hope you join us next time.
This Is Where I Leave You is available as an audiobook in the catalog of the Washington Talking Book and Braille Library with the class ID 071875. It's also available as a Braille book with the class ID BR024588. And it did get turned into a movie. It's got the same title, it came out in 2014, was directed by Sean Levy, and it stars Jason Bateman, Tina Fey, Adam Driver, and Jane Fonda, among others. If you have any questions or comments about the library, or to see if you qualify for our services, visit WTBBL.org or leave us a voicemail at 206-615-0400 or toll free at 800-542-0866. This episode of Literary Notes is a production of the Washington Talking Book and Braille Library based in Seattle, Washington. I'm your producer, Nathan Ureta. Thanks for listening, and happy holidays from all of us here at the Washington Talking Book and Braille Library.